Today we're going to be covering a big update on the PlayStation 4 exclusive Days Gone, and that update came from an unlikely source, but there's a lot of credibility behind it. What would the dream Final Fantasy game be? Well, series director Hajime Tabata gave his input on that idea, and a Nintendo Switch emulator is in the works. Let's get right into this. The PlayStation 4 exclusive Days Gone has been one of the more anticipated PlayStation 4 titles, however, it hasn't been up there with the top tier exclusives such as God of War and Spider-Man, but Days Gone is still shaping up very nicely. On the surface, with its chaotic zombie-themed style of gameplay, many might be worried that the game wouldn't have a lot of substance in the storytelling department, however, those worries seemingly have been put to rest. Found on the Star Citizen Reverse the Verse livestream by DualShockers, community content manager Jared Huckabee mentioned that he was talking with popular actor Sam Witwer, who plays protagonist Deacon St. John in Days Gone, and he mentioned that Sony's upcoming game has, quote, a whole bunch of hours of cinematics. That's really interesting because on the surface, Days Gone seemed a lot like a game like Dead Rising, a game that would really focus on the chaotic and heavy gameplay but not have a lot of substance to the storytelling. Now, if you've actually paid attention to the trailers do give you a sense that there's a deeper story in here, but I don't think anyone really expected a whole bunch of hours of cinematics, and I think a lot of gamers would take that in a positive way. And for those of you that don't know who Sony Bend are, and I don't blame you because they haven't worked on a lot of marquee AAA titles. They put out the Siphon Filter games on PlayStation, from Siphon Filter, Siphon Filter 2, and Siphon Filter 3. On the PlayStation 2, they put out more Siphon Filter games, Siphon Filter The Omega Strain, Siphon Filter Dark Mirror, and Siphon Filter Logan Shadow, which were also released on the PlayStation Portable. They did Resistance Retribution back in 2009. That was a PSP title, and that game was absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, not a lot of people played it. And then probably their most notable game was Uncharted Golden Abyss on the PlayStation Vita, and that was a great translation of Uncharted onto a portable device. Probably the PlayStation Vita's most technically impressive title, and while it wasn't up to the level of Uncharted 2 or 3, it was more comparable to the first Uncharted title, but that was a great game, so you know that Sony Bend have a lot of talent behind them, and with working on a new IP in Days Gone, there's a lot of potential here. But honestly, personally, I was worried that the game would be a little mundane and not have a lot of depth to it, but the fact that it does have, quote, hours of cinematics, that puts me at ease a little bit. And while we don't have an exact release date for Days Gone, it is expected to release in 2018, and it's coming with a slew of other major PlayStation 4 exclusives, and this is one that really could get lost in the shuffle, and I really hope it doesn't because Bend Studio deserves their game to have a lot of recognition after putting out a lot of portable titles that were great games but were handcuffed a little bit. This is their first time where the handcuffs are really coming off, the shackles are coming off, and they can put out a AAA big budget title on the PlayStation 4. Moving on, Final Fantasy has been one of the long-running franchises and one of the most iconic franchises in all of gaming, and what would the dream Final Fantasy game be? The ultimate Final Fantasy title? Well, Hajime Tabata was featured in an interview published on the latest official Xbox magazine UK. That's the issue for February 2018, where he talked about that. He was asked what he would do if given unlimited resources to create his dream Final Fantasy game, and Tabata said this, quote, I would separate from the developers and create a version of Final Fantasy that you could play with complete freedom. You would never know what would happen next, but each and every player would be able to enjoy it how they please. Now, Final Fantasy has been a game that's always had a distinct story. To give that level of freedom to a Final Fantasy game, that's pretty interesting. Truth be told, Final Fantasy 15 does have a lot of freedom to it. The main story isn't really the most engaging part about Final Fantasy 15. It's actually exploring the open world. Many would say the main story of FF15 was the weakest element, but nonetheless, let's not get into that debate right now. But a Final Fantasy game with unlimited freedom sounds like something I and many other gamers could definitely get behind. Another piece of interesting news in that interview was when he talked about loot boxes, and here's what he said in response to that. He said, quote, I don't have anything against them, however, I do think that loot box creators need to be careful not to jeopardize their relationships with players. Obviously, that's been a big issue when it comes to some games and loot boxes. We won't mention any specific games, but I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. And finally, a Nintendo Switch emulator has been announced through Twitter. It is called Yuzu, and the official team posted on Twitter saying, quote, announcing Yuzu, the first Nintendo Switch emulator that does all of the things you didn't need it to do. Stay tuned for more from the Yuzu team. This Switch emulator is being created by members of Citra, the team that also brought you the 3DS emulator, and while we don't know much about it, that's pretty interesting that we are seeing a Switch emulator. For those of you that don't know, Simu is the major Wii U emulator, and that emulator has been a go-to to play Zelda Breath of the Wild on PC. With the right PC hardware, that game looks incredible, so it'll be interesting to see how the Switch emulator progresses. Again, we don't know much more about it beyond that, but work is underway on a Switch emulator. Now, who knows when it'll be at a state that's actually playable and usable, but personally speaking, I don't doubt the development of emulators anymore after seeing what's happened with RPCS3, a PlayStation 3 emulator, which I thought would never be able to be emulated. With talented minds, really anything is possible, so we'll see how the Switch emulator turns out. For now, it's a work in progress. So that wraps up the news for today. What do you think about Days Gone having, quote, hours of cinematics? What would your dream Final Fantasy game be? And what do you think about the potential of a Switch emulator? Sound off in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.